Today, I want to look at the upcoming season for some Pacers bench big men. Goga Bitadze, Isaiah Jackson, Daniel Theis. A lot of questions about who will and won't play in that group. Big seasons coming for all of them in terms of proving it for their upcoming career. And we'll talk about it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News. And today, we are diving into another group season preview. Done some individual players recently with Buddy Hield and Chris Duarte. Today, we're going to look at the bench big men, Goga Bitadze, Daniel Theis, and Isaiah Jackson, not in that order. And they have a lot of interesting things about their upcoming season. Who's going to play of that group and what roles? There's some open minutes in this reserve big man rotation. Who's going to take a step forward and show what impact they can have? Because Isaiah Jackson looks very promising, but none of those guys have a certain future with the Pacers or in the league at this stage, although Jackson probably has the longest leash. But really, a lot of those guys need to establish themselves this year. So lots of very interesting topics to discuss with those guys. Sorry for 2 days in a row of player season preview content. It's just how the schedule broke out. But going forward, that should no longer be the case on a week-to-week basis. Let's start by just diving right in to Isaiah Jackson's season, the most interesting of this trio to me, like I just said, and the most likely to be a long-term success story with the Pacers, especially of this trio. Had a pretty good rookie season, all things considered. It was able to meet pretty lofty expectations set for him skill-wise by members of the organization, which was hilarious to me. I think I've talked about this anecdote before on the show, but in training camp and in media day, there's a lot of crap that's said, quite frankly, about rookies in terms of this guy can jump higher than any rookie I've ever seen, or he's so athletic, or he can defend this way, that way. And I never really buy it. But Isaiah Jackson, someone, I forget who, last year at media day was like, I think he can guard all 5 positions. And I was like, he's a rookie. No, he can't. He kind of can. He's a very good defender, very springy. He actually, one of the positions he's worst at guarding is the 5 spot. He's a very unique defender, and I'm looking forward to seeing his growth this year. Looking at his projections statistically from Basketball Reference per 36 minutes are fascinating, right? 19.5 points, 9.4 rebounds, and 3 blocks per 36, the projection from Basketball Reference. That'd be a small decline in scoring, which I think is interesting, and a small decline in rebounding, which again is interesting, and a little bit of a decline in blocks, but an uptick in some other areas, steals, shooting percentages, things like that. But in general, Basketball Reference not super rosy on his per minute projections, and I can sort of understand why in some statistical categories, mostly because a lot of what he does on things that put numbers on a stat sheet, right? Blocks, I think he'll do better than their per 36 there, but in terms of assists and rebounds and points, it requires another set of actions to happen. And I don't think Isaiah Jackson's going to be dribbling or around the rim more or in more situations where he's got advantageous rebounding position. Nothing about what he needs to work on this year suggests that he'll be in better positions to have better stats than last year. I think he could be a better player, certainly, but I don't necessarily think his stats will look much better. So, yeah, I think some of these numbers are too low because they're lower than his rookie year, and he'll be better. But I don't necessarily think that his per 36 numbers will jump a ton from year 1 to 2. I think he'll just get more refined in a lot of areas, and that's something Basketball Reference does project is a slightly better three-point percentage. I think he'll get better there, and free throw percentage, a little bit lower fouls per 36 minutes, a little better defensive stuff from him. That would be a big jump and something he really needs to do. I think those sort of small refinements, he can play more, he can finish more variety of plays, will be more where you see Jackson grow an impact instead of he can make a one dribble play and up his scoring, or he's suddenly a way better rebounder, and maybe he can be a little bit better on the glass with the year of experience under his belt and a normal offseason, things like that. But I think in general, his per 36 numbers will be pretty close to last year. His role projection for this year seems like he'll be the first in line to be the backup center, sneak in for some power forward minutes early in the season. Jalen Smith projects to start at the 4, Miles Turner at the 5, O'Shea Brissett right there as the backup 4. Maybe Jackson over Brissett if they want to play Jackson and Goga. That seems dubious to me, but it is possible. So I think Isaiah Jackson starts in that mix, and Goga should maybe they should try to find a way to get him a few minutes at some point this year. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think in general, Jackson's the leader in the clubhouse to be that backup 5 when the season opens and get some minutes at the 4, depending on who he's playing next to. Biggest question for me about Isaiah Jackson's season: what offensive skills can he add? Like I said, I think he projects to be a very good defender, can guard multiple positions despite being very tall, or on top of being very tall. A very unique combo with his speed and athleticism. Can he guard fives is a long-term projection thing, but this year specifically, last year, you look back, he was a play finisher through and through, right? All of his threes were assisted. Over 3/4 of his twos were assisted. And of the ones that weren't, I would guess quite a few of them were off of offensive rebounds. Can he add a one dribble move, a little bit more reliable three, right? Like Basketball Reference has that projection at 35% from three for him this coming season. If he hits that number, that would be huge for his projections. Then he can play the 4 a little more confidently and permanently. Can he add any sort of thing that isn't just screen and jump high on offense? And I think he can do a little bit more than that right now, but not a ton more. And that's something I'll be interested to see him develop this season. And I think he can still be a good player, even if he never develops any sort of dribbling attack, if he's just an okay shooter, because he's so athletic and springy and quick. I'm not comparing the players at all, but Rudy Gobert without a jumper has found a way to be quite a very talented offensive player, right? Because of his efficiency around the rim, things like that. Jackson can work on those skills and still be good on offense. But if he could add even just a 1 or 2 dribble move or a shot, one or the other, would be huge for his growth this year. And I'll be watching that very closely because I'm very high on him as a defender, but his offensive game leaves a little bit to be desired. Now, speaking of his defense, though, the biggest negative for him last year there was fouls. Big thing for him. It prevented him from playing more minutes in a lot of games, even when he was starting. He started 15 times down the stretch of last season after the Pacers made some trades and dealt with their new look roster. And in a lot of those games, he couldn't play very much because he was dealing with foul trouble, right? He started a game against the Wizards and he had 4 fouls and played less than 8 minutes. He started the game and played less than 8 minutes in a game last season. Like, that is the sort of foul trouble craziness that he had to deal with. Under 20 minutes a few times in a game he started because of foul trouble, right? Fouled out multiple times, which it's not a big deal as a rookie, to foul out, I think 4 times, it looks like 3 times throughout the course of the season. Like, it's expected that you'll have to keep up with these sort of speed things. But as you evolve and get better, he needs to be fouling less and recognize the patterns quicker and know how to get around the fouls better. And I think that's a big thing for him, both to play more and to be more effective. Fouls are bad. It puts the other team on the free throw line or gets them closer to the bonus. I think those sort of things will help him a lot. The other stat I'm monitoring with him is something I mentioned earlier: the percent of his shots that are assisted. Not that 75% on twos, 100% on threes is like a devastatingly bad rate. 4% of assisted shots. I just think it'll be telling for what sort of growth he's had, right? Looking at last season specifically, Miles Turner, who's considered, not necessarily a solid creator, 68% of his 2-pointers were assisted, right? So almost 10% better than Jackson's. He was able to find his own ways to score. Goga Bitadze is below 70% on twos, whereas Isaiah Jackson's at about 76%. He needs to get a little better at self-creating inside the arc specifically. Some other, like Sabonis, was near 60%. We all know he can create his shot a little better. But in general, some of these forward types on the Pacers had much lower percentages in the 60s, in the 50s, in the case of like Torrey Craig, for example. What a forgotten era of Pacers basketball Torrey Craig was a part of. But that sort of number, I think if he can get closer to that, would show a lot of his growth this coming season. How important is Isaiah Jackson to the success of the Pacers this season? These are all the questions I like to ask in a season preview. I'd say under the guise of wins and losses, not a ton. He's probably their 4th big in that mix as of now, and he could totally move up in that hierarchy, in that rotation, with where his spot should be. He could jump past O'Shea Brissett or Jalen Smith, to me, certainly this year in terms of impact if his year goes well. But I don't think that necessarily he'll have a huge win-loss impact unless he can really shoot it and becomes the starting 4, and then they'd have a good 4 for the first time in a while, or a more natural 4 for the first time in a while. Maybe he's not the perfectly natural 4 because he's a little skinnier and looks like he'll be a center because of his athleticism and things like that. But if he can shoot, it's a much more natural fit. And, after the draft last year, a lot of the execs were talking about him playing 4 and 5, and it would be huge for him to grow in that way. Either way, I would say in general, your 4th big is not going to have a ton of win-loss impact, especially a 20-year-old in that spot. But there's a chance if he grows past that, that'll make me look dumb. Doesn't turn 21 until next year, until 2023. It's crazy how young he still is. Now, is he angling for a spot on the Pacers long term? Another question I like to ask in these season previews as I cut into This is a long-term project now for the Pacers. This isn't just how can they help this year. It's how can they help in many years in the future. And no, I don't think Isaiah Jackson's angling for a spot on the Pacers long term. I think he'll stay as long as the Pacers will have him in terms of being on the team. He's clearly close to or already a rotation caliber big with very unique skills. But is he a lock to start one day? Is he a lock that he has to play 5 or 4? I think he's, and I kind of described this with like Aaron Nesmith was in this boat a little bit. For example, Chris Duarte definitely in this boat. They're not angling for a spot on the team in Duarte's case, especially, but they're angling for a role, a specific role, maybe a heightened role, maybe a role better suited for them. And I think Isaiah Jackson is certainly in that boat where he will be on the Pacers for more seasons unless he's in a blockbuster trade. But what his role will be on future Pacers teams, if that's backup center, if that's backup power forward, if that's a starter at either of those spots, that's what he's angling for this season to me as he adds skills and develops in his age 2021 season, which again is an important thing to discuss with Isaiah Jackson. He is 20 right now. He is 10 years younger than Daniel Theis, who we'll be talking about later. Let's pivot, go to another player, talk about Goga Bitadze in his pivotal 4th year of his career, a chance to establish himself potentially, as the Pacers don't have the same kind of veteran logjam in front of him as they have in the past, but he still might have to fight for minutes and opportunity on this Pacers team. Before we dive in to Goga Bitadze's second season coming up, let's talk about BetOnline.net, your number one source for all of your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. You can find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week games at BetOnline.net. They're also your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. They've got all the lines up for NFL's upcoming week, tomorrow night's Thursday night football game. Chiefs favored by 4.5 against the Chargers. Colts favored by 4 against the Jags. We all know how their last game against the Jags went to close out last season. All those lines and more over at BetOnline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events. They've also got MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. They'll have basketball once it gets going again. Head over to that website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, big one. Locked On Suns with Brendan Clean. Huge news in the NBA today about the Robert Sarver investigation. The owner of the Suns suspended for a year, $10 million fine, big potential ripple effects in Phoenix. If you want to learn more about that situation, what it means for the Suns, the Phoenix Mercury, all that, Locked On Suns and Locked On Women's Basketball are the way to go. Huge news that is. And I'm surprised it's not one bigger news and two coming with more punishment. And that's where Brendan Clean can bridge those gaps for me and you. Hey, back to the Pacers. Let's talk about Goga Bitadze's upcoming season. Rare that a 4th season can be so pivotal, but the way Goga's career has gone has just been weird. And it's not his fault. He got drafted to a team that already had Turner, that already had Sabonis, and had some young bigs like O'Shea Brissett come in the mix early in his career, and just had some other guys who stole minutes, right? If you go back to his first season in the league, they also had like Doug McDermott occasionally played the 4, TJ Leaf was playing 4-5, Alize Johnson was on that team, Jakar Sampson was playing backup 4 for portions of the season. They had other guys in the mix. Then his second year, same 2 guys ahead of him, obviously, with Turner and Sabonis, and they still had Sampson, and their team just kept evolving with guys. That's the year they added O'Shea Brissett. They signed Amita Bryma because they had a billion center injuries, right? Like they've had other guys also in the mix. And so they finally trade they finally trade Sabonis, and so it's just Turner, there we go, in front of Goga, and then good stuff starts to happen, right? And I know that a lot of people don't feel like this stretch was as impactful as the number suggests, but from the All-Star game to the end of the season last year, I've recited this several times on this podcast, Goga Bitadze, 15 games from the All-Star break to the end of the season, and injuries were a problem for him again, but still, 12 points per game, 5 rebounds per game. This is only in about 21 minutes. 62% shooting, 46% from deep, getting to the foul line a lot, hitting about 80% of those, racking up over a block per game, 2 assists. Like, he found a way to be impactful. But it's still not clear to me exactly what his role is going to be. Is Isaiah Jackson going to be ahead of him, which I think should probably be the case. But I think Goga's earned an opportunity to be the backup center because he's been buried so often. He's in the 4th year. This is the one. He gets a new contract next season from some team. He's got to prove himself this year. But the Pacers also kind of need to give him an opportunity to. It's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out because I don't know what his role is. I would say reserve big right now, probably their fifth big behind Smith, Turner, Jackson, and Brissett. But Terry Taylor's right there. Daniel Theis, we'll talk about the ends right there. Like, I think he deserves some sort of minutes, like over a couple of those guys, because he needs that opportunity to prove himself after they drafted him and just haven't really played him. He needs some chances, but he's got to prove it as well. Because if not, the Pacers are probably going to maybe explore trading him because he's just burning a hole in a roster spot if he's, their sixth big and won't be back. And if he can prove himself, then they'll have to figure out how to sort out their rotation. But they have to give him the chance, I think. I mean, they just have it. And for good reason they have it. This happened to Aaron Holiday and TJ Leaf as well, where it was hard to play them when the Pacers were trying to win and they were still growing. But eventually, Aaron Holiday got some sort of chances and proved to be too rickety and unreliable, and the Pacers used him to move up in the draft. TJ Leaf proved to be not reliable enough. They traded him in a salary dump to get under the tax, right? They moved on from those guys when they realized they weren't good enough. They have not had done that with Batadze yet. They haven't had the opportunity. They have to figure out how good he is. And the biggest question about his season is, beyond how good is he, is sort of related to that to me. Can he be consistent? Can he find that consistency? That post-All-Star break stretch was impressive for him, given what he's been in his career and things like that. Can he do that for a season, even if he's not playing every game? For example, go back 2 years ago, 2020-21, Nate Bjorkgren coached season. No one thinks Goga had a great year that year. I don't think Goga had a great year that year. But he did play okay at times. And there was a stretch for all of March and April. We're talking about a 22-game stretch. Now, reminder, I'm talking about 13 minutes per game. Extremely small sample. Keep that in mind when you hear these numbers. 6 points, 4 rebounds, 1 assist, 1.5 blocks per game in that stretch. 31% from deep, 3/4 of his free throws go in, right? So per 36 minutes, he's playing 12 minutes a game. Triple that. That's basically 18, 12, and 3. On pretty good, on good enough for a big man outside shooting and decent inside shooting as well. Like, that's an okay stretch, but it gets kind of forgotten because he was inconsistent in there. He had a hot stretch for a little bit in there, and the Pacers were actually winning quite a bit. They won 4 or 5 and 5 of 7 with him in the rotation because he had a good stretch in there, but he also stunk it up kind of for a little stretch in there too. He was all over the place. Can he find some consistency? Can he put together a bunch of good games in a row? That's been really tough for him, and sort of the challenge for him is there's some matchups where he fares very well and he can kind of contain the big and the ball handler and pick and roll, and he knows where to stand, and some matchups where he looks a little more lost. If he can find that defensive consistency, I think he can be a rotation level big. But I understand why a lot of people do not think that and disagree with me, because he's been wildly inconsistent. He has a lot of lowlights in a way that is hard to overcome, but I do think he has been a rotation level big at times in his career. And I will be curious to see if the Pacers, the question for Goga is, can he be consistent? But the question for the Pacers is, can they find a role for him to prove it? Important stats to monitor. I mean, minutes. Is he playing? If they can't play him, if they can't even find a way to get him out there because Jackson is so good or Theis is so needed, or they're playing Terry Taylor instead because Terry Taylor deserves the minutes because of something he did, which if Terry Taylor's playing over him, he probably deserved it. Okay, that's fine. That stat, you're still monitoring Goga's minutes, because if it's really low, they should probably look to move him for something. Even if they can get very little for him or just need to trade him for a salary that makes more sense for them, they should explore that. But other ones, 3-point percentage, right? Last year, he finally had, like I said, post All-Star break, that hot stretch of shooting, and that saved him from a miserable shooting season last year. He still finished under 30% at 29%. He shot well from deep overseas. He shot well from deep in the G League. There are a lot of reasons to believe his free throw percentage is over 70, that he's a better shooter than he's shown. But he's got to make them eventually. If he doesn't make them, I'm just talking about reasons it looks like he can make them and not him actually making them, which is a big distinction. And again, if he's not playing a lot and he's missing threes, that suggests that, he probably shouldn't be playing. And the last one for me here is defensive stuff, on off specifically. Can he be a higher impact defender than some other Pacers bigs who are young and unproven? Jalen Smith, Isaiah Jackson specifically. Can he prove to have more defensive impact than those guys? That would give them, Pacers, a reason to say, we would like to explore his defense and play him. If he can't exceed those guys defensively, I mean, he's definitely not catching them offensively, given that the Pacers want to play fast and he's not as fast. They'll have to figure it out, what they can do and can't do with him. And I think those stats will sort of tell the story. So how important is Goga to the success of the Pacers this year? Not really that much, unless he takes a big jump in year 4, which is possible. Bigs take a while, especially coming into dramatically different situations. And like, he played well in Eurobasket against NBA competition. He played well for his European clubs, BMAX, stuff like that. But before the NBA, that style suited him a little bit better. Can he make that transition this year? to the NBA style. That is how he would be important to the team this year in terms of wins and losses, is reaching that level of player and taking that step forward. But as of now, if he's a reserve big, like I said with Jackson, not a huge amount of importance to the success of the Pacers this year, but could be. But is he angling for a spot on the Pacers long term? Does he have a role in the Pacers going forward? He is absolutely angling for a spot on the Pacers long term. Isaiah Jackson's in the mix. Jalen Smith's in the mix. O'Shea Brissett's in the mix. Terry Taylor's in the mix. Miles Turner's only 26. Who knows what his future is with the team, but that's 5 bigs, 26 and younger, that Goga has to compete with to say, I deserve to play, I deserve to be paid, I deserve to be an NBA player. He is absolutely angling for a spot on this team because, I know a lot of those guys. In fact, Taylor, Brissett, Turner, and Bitadze, all on expiring contracts, right? That's sort of interesting to me as those bench bigs fighting for their future in the league and with the Pacers. Who can step up and prove that they belong with Indiana long-term? Goga is in that mix. So fascinating season upcoming for the Georgian big man. Just had a good Eurobasket despite his team not doing particularly well. And he did have an ankle injury and off-court concerns with this fight with Furkan Korkmaz that didn't lead to any punishments, but certainly a huge season coming up for him. And I'll be curious if the Pacers can find him a role and if he can take advantage, because let's be real. Like, I talked about his good post All-Star break stretch last season. He had a bad stretch before the All-Star break. Like, he was not good in January, for example, right? Like, he cannot have that this season. He has to show that he's grown past that as a player, and he is a guy you can play consistently. If not, his career might soon end, and the Pacers will have to answer questions about that 18th pick that year. I still think Goga's a rotation level big. I know I'm one of the very, very few people who still feels that way. But it's tough in his situation, and he's got to prove it when he gets opportunities. There will be some. Bigs get hurt, but he's got to prove it in those moments. Daniel Theis, last up today. Big win for Daniel Theis today in Eurobasket. We'll talk about that a little bit today, but not a ton. Before we talk about Daniel Theis's upcoming first season with the Pacers, I got to talk to you guys about Acre Pro when it comes to land sales. It pays to have experts in your corner. Acre Pro Midwest Farm Group are your local farmland specialists with decades of experience in Indiana agriculture. Nobody knows the market better. Whether you're doing a 1031 exchange, expanding your operation, selling a row crop farm, your local Acre Pro agent will walk the land with you and ensure the deal is done right. Great service is just the beginning. Acre Pro provides unparalleled land data, including soil ratings, elevation, flood zones, land valuation across parcels, so you can get the full picture up front and be confident in the land market when you're getting in there. Your agent will cater to each of your individual needs, help you navigate the complexities of buying and selling land so the process is made simple. Experience the ease of Acre Pro by working with farmland specialists Kyle Rule, Brady Ham, and Neil Hurt, and Kyle Spray. Visit acrepro.com or call 765-587-3185 to talk to your local land expert today. acrepro.com, and again, that's 765-587-3185. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen today, big Eurobasket performances from Germany and Spain earlier today. Spain's got Usman Garuba on the Rockets, so Locked On Rockets is a great way to go. Jackson Gatlin doing a great job covering that young and building team. And hey, Steph Curry, KD, LeBron, Giannis, Nikola Jokic, which NBA player moves the betting line the most this season? Locked On and BetOnline odds makers present the NBA top 50 most valuable players starting on September 19th, 5 days from now. You can find the top 50 players on Locked On NBA wherever you get your podcasts and YouTube in that 5 days. Hey, let's talk about Daniel Theis' season. Been a big part of Germany's team, starting for them as they have now reached the semifinals of Eurobasket. They will have a chance to at least compete for a medal coming this weekend. Big time for him and Dennis Schroeder and some other NBA guys, Franz Wagner, for example. Can he carry that sort of level of impact to the Pacers? Daniel Theis, interesting player, right? On good teams, he's shown some value as a screener and a decent passer and a decent enough shooter for a big man. All right, 33% for his career. He's done well with Boston and Brad Stevens before. He had an okay stretch with the Chicago Bulls in 2020-21 in a similar situation where he was that big on a better team. That's the most opportunity he's got, 25 minutes per game with the Bulls. However, with bad teams, Boston was not as good his first year there, right? With the Rockets at the beginning of last year, struggled to get involved a little more. The screening becomes less important when players don't know how to use them. It's harder to be that setup man when, again, players don't know where to stand or they're late in their rotations. It's harder to finish plays productively when you're getting worse shots, right? And he is a finisher and a helpful player, but not a self-creator at all. And that type of player does better on good teams than bad teams, and that's why I'll be very interested to see how he can do on the Pacers, who project to be more of a bad team. Because looking at his likely role this season, I've had this conversation with quite a few fans, which is interesting. Especially when they watch him play for Germany. He looks pretty good. It's like, should this guy play on the Pacers, right? He's one of their highest paid players, ironically, and maybe is their second best actual center right now. Like, that's possible. Yeah, okay. Maybe if Jalen Smith is the guy he was with the Suns and not the guy he was with the Pacers, he might be their second best front court player. Should he play? I mean, if they're going for wins every night, maybe he steals 10 minutes every night behind Turner, Smith, Brissett, whoever. But to me, he should be a depth big, a guy who plays when there's injuries and things like that. He does have value as a screener, certainly probably the best screener on this team. In fact, I don't really think that's debatable, but I don't think on a younger team that's sort of trying to develop talent, he should play over either of the guys we've already talked about today, or even Terry Taylor at the 5. I would understand Theis playing some minutes. I don't think it's completely baseless in reason, but I think there are stronger arguments for other players to play over him. So honestly, I don't think he should have a role when the season starts, but I would understand, especially Rick Carlisle, saying these vets who have these key skills that can help our young players, they should play a little bit to help them out. Good screens can help guys like Tyrese Halliburton get open and things like that. I don't think he should play, but it's possible. That's one of those things we'll have to see what the Pacers are feeling. I'll be curious. And looking at his stat projections, which I somehow forgot to do with Gogo because I had lots to say about his past seasons, 14 points per 36, 8 rebounds, 2 assists is what Basketball Reference has. Looking at last year, that's about in line with his season stats. A little better than his Rocket stats. I would say his per 36s will end up closer to his Houston numbers, so a little lower in basically every single category that I just said, except for the rebounding, which is about the same. And I think that makes sense. Outside of Halliburton setting him up, and Halliburton could just be awesome enough that this sounds dumb, but he'll have to take harder shots than he did with Boston. His screens will be for guys that don't necessarily know exactly what they're doing right now all the time, like Benedict Mathurin, for example. So yeah, I think he could do a little bit better than those Houston stats because Halliburton's here. They have a little bit better creation than that Houston team did, but not a ton. So I'd say most of his projections per 36 are overshots, except for his 3-point percentage. I think that's a little low, especially given what his it's at 31.9%. Given what his career's looked like, and they have his field goal percentage at 52.5. That's much lower than his career and lower than he's done almost every season of his career. I think that'll be a little higher as well. What's the biggest question to monitor for Theis' season? Does he play, first of all? I mean, can he help at all, right? If he plays and he's like this guy he was with Houston, who's not really helping that much and isn't, for Houston last year was sort of like experimenting, having a bridge between old big men like Capella to their new Şengün experiment. It was kind of a bridge of, okay, they got a double big front court to figure out and that bridge Merida era. For the Pacers, he's not really filling that sort of role. They are still employing the center they've had since 2016. There's no bridging of eras. He's not really teaching. He'll be valuable for guys like Goga, especially, who came from the Europe experience as well. But I don't think he has that sort of value like he did with Houston. So how can he help this team? Right? Is he their best screener and they put him on the floor in crunch time, or how does he fit into their offensive system that's a little faster paced than maybe what Boston was doing, for example? If he can find a way to be the best at something on the team, or if he can keep up, and I think he can keep up, to be fair, just like consistently being caught up with the game. I think there is a niche situation where he can be helpful, but what is that, both on and off the court? That's the questions I'll have about Daniel Theis this year. Most important stats to monitor: screen assists. I mean, he's the best screener on the team. If he can be giving them good screen assist numbers, opening up the court, that's a reason to play him, right? This guy sets good screens, makes Tyrese Halliburton attack pick and roll situations, reps he needs to be getting as the full-time lead ball handler for this Pacers team. That has some value, absolutely. Same with Benedict Mathurin. You got to show him what it's like to have a good screener. How can he develop against a damaged defense? Duarte, every guard, really, but the young guys especially. If he can help in that way, the screen assist numbers will be telling, especially if he's getting minutes every game. And his numbers with Halliburton will be interesting to me because he's the best screener the Pacers have to offer. Sabonis and Halliburton never played together. Pacers screeners were not particularly effective last year. Smith, Turner about average in that regard. Can Theis and Hallie show off something impressive that makes the Pacers go, hey, we've got to focus on getting reserve bigs who can set screens. And I'll be curious about his defensive rating in general as well, because if he can't really defend, it's going to be really hard for the Pacers to get him out there. I mean, he has to be effective. If he's going to be a veteran to play more than some of the young guys, he has to be very effective. And if his defense isn't good, it's going to be very hard for the Pacers to get him out there. So how important is Daniel Theis to the success of the Pacers this season? no matter what rubric you wanted to find for the Pacers, wins and losses being your definition of success or development, neither is he really massively moving the needle. That's help on development, is kind of teaching younger guys, and I think Theis can do that. Again, the Rockets gave him an opportunity to try that last year, but you know he won't be playing enough to me to have this massive impact on the win loss, and he isn't young enough to really develop to have this key part in their future. Whatever rubric you would like to define for a player success with the Pacers this year, I don't think Theis will have a huge impact on either side of how you'd look at that. And is he angling for a spot on the Pacers long term? No, no, he is not. I mean, he's in an interesting spot where like his contract's a little tough to trade because it's at best, right, a neutral value deal. 4 years, $35 million. When he signed it with Houston, it already got traded twice in 1 year after signing it. Now, the last year of that is a club option. So really, it's 2 years, 18 million left. That's not like untradeable, and nothing that small is bad, especially when the player is effective. It's just, figuring out exactly how effective he can be is tough. And when he's a pretty much fairly paid guy at a position that's going out of demand, it's not easy to move him. So I don't think he has a role in the Pacers long term because they have so many young bigs, like I said in the Goga segment, with Bitadze and Smith and Turner and Jackson and Brissett and Taylor all in the mix. I might have just said someone twice. There are a lot of guys who are going to be fighting for minutes there, and I think the Pacers will lean towards the youth at some point this year, maybe even from day one. That means Theis is probably not a guy they're going to prioritize in terms of getting minutes, developing, and he likely does not have a big role on this team long term. I'll be curious what he does, though. It's hard to properly discuss what he can do because getting Nesmith in that trade from Boston, the Pacers did. He's young; they can explore some options with him and see if he has a role for them. Theis is 30. He's not a guy that it seems like they would really prioritize. It seems like he was more there for salary reasons, and we'll see what he ultimately ends up doing. Perhaps a center injury is what the Pacers will look for with moving Theis at some point, and perhaps he impresses and they say, "Yep, play out this contract with us, no problem." We'll see. I don't know what to expect from this season, but he has looked good for Germany in Eurobasket, and you can watch him more this week. He'll have at least 2 more games for the German squad. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. If you're still here and listening, tomorrow we're doing awards and standings predictions. Looking forward to doing that, breaking up these season previews on our own. Then Friday is Ben Matherin's. Looking forward to doing that, talking about the 6th overall pick and what his upcoming season is going to look like. So you won't want to miss that. Hope you guys enjoyed today. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.